Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a time when the humble pint of ale wasn't just a way to unwind. After a long day, it was pretty much your daily hydration strategy. Picture yourself now as you wander along a muddy, uneven lane of a medieval English village. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and damp straw. You're weary from a day spent tending sheep, mending fences, or hauling sacks of grain. And what's waiting for you at the end of this hard-worn path? Not a cool glass of water? Oh no, that might make you ill. Instead, a wooden cup of ale, warm and faintly sweet, safer than any well in town. You probably won't survive long without it, considering the state of medieval water. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, why not post your location and what time it is for you right now? I love seeing where you all are listening from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your boots squelch a little as you cross into the tavern, a place that's more than just a spot for drinking. It's the heart of the community, a mix of chatter deals made over tankards, and let's face it, a fair bit of gossip. The wooden beams are dark with soot, and somewhere in the corner a lute strums a lazy tune. The ale you're handed is not just a drink, it's life. Because let's be honest, the village stream you passed on your way here, that thing's probably brimming with all sorts of things you don't want to think about. Ale brewed with care well most of the time is your ticket to staying healthy, or at least healthier than the alternative. And here's a little nugget to ponder as you take your first sip. This isn't some rare treat. Ale is part of every meal. Morning ale, noon ale, evening. You guessed it, more ale. Even children get their share, though theirs might be a lighter, weaker brew called small ale. It's less about catching a buzz and more about not catching dysentery. Now, as you glance around this dimly lit room, you might notice something odd, or at least it would be odd to us modern folk. There's no menu, no sign over the door advertising Bob's Best Bitter. Instead, ale houses and taverns rely on word of mouth and a kind of unspoken understanding. You walk in and you expect the ale to be at the very least drinkable. But what ensures that? That's where the curious world of ale rules begins to bubble up. Rules so detailed, so oddly specific, they could make you chuckle even as you settle deeper into your chair. Picture, if you will, a medieval villager trying to cheat the system, watering down their ale just a tad to make a few extra pennies. Enter the ale conner, a figure we'll meet properly soon, tasked with protecting your pint from such trickery. But even now, as you sip your ale in this snug little tavern, the legacy of these rules shapes what's in your cup. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of ale was purely for safety, or if people genuinely preferred the taste over water. And let's be honest, you probably would too, given the alternatives of the time. There's something comforting about knowing your drink has been boiled, fermented, and tended to. Even if it's a bit warm by our standards, even if it tastes, well, a little funky at times. So, you settle in. The tavern creaks softly with every breeze that slips through the ill-fitting door. The fire crackles low, and as your eyes grow heavy, your mind drifts not to thoughts of kings or battles, but to the simple, soothing world of medieval ale, a world where every pint tells a story, and every sip connects you to the rhythms of village life. You're still seated there, warm tankard in hand, when the door creaks open and lets in a chilly gust of evening air. In steps a figure who at first glance looks like just another villager. Simple tunic, breeches patched at the knees, and boots crusted with the same mud that clings to yours. But the way folks glance his way tells you he's someone special. Meet the ale conner, the medieval official with what might be the most peculiar, sticky, and occasionally embarrassing job in town. The ale conner is here to ensure that what you're drinking meets the oddly specific standards set by local law. His role protect the public from weak or dishonest brew and make sure no enterprising tavern keeper is cutting corners. He carries no grand scepter or sword. No, his tools are far humbler. A wooden spoon perhaps, a bit of cloth, and most famously his own backside. You see, one of the traditional tests of ale quality involves pouring a sample onto a wooden bench. The conner then sits directly upon it, clad in leather breeches, and waits a few moments. If upon standing his trousers stick, the ale is judged sufficiently sugary proof that the brewer hasn't skimped on malt. If his rear lifts cleanly, well, that's a fine slapped on the alewife or brewer. Imagine trying to enforce regulations today with such a method. Modern health inspectors would have a field day. As you observe him going about his task, you can't help but smirk. The room watches with a kind of sleepy fascination, as if this is just part of the nightly entertainment. And in truth, it kind of is. In a time before Netflix, a good ale inspection offers its own gentle drama. The ale conner doesn't only rely on sticky seats. He takes a long sniff of the brew, checks the clarity by holding it up to the flickering light of the hearth, and even tastes it, though one suspects that after a few rounds of sticky breeches duty, the tasting is the preferred part of his work. His nose wrinkles thoughtfully as he samples the tavern's offering tonight, his brow furrowed in concentration. You might wonder what he's thinking, but perhaps even he isn't sure. Historians still debate whether these conners were true experts in ale or simply trusted members of the community, given a slightly ridiculous role. There's a fringe detail here that might amuse you. Some records hint that in certain towns the conner's bench was specially crafted with grooves to hold the ale and improve the stickiness of the test. Because why risk an inadequate surface for such a noble duty? As you sit back, tankard cradled in both hands, you reflect on how seriously these folks take their ale. And why wouldn't they? It's more than a drink. It's a staple. A small comfort, a moment of shared peace in a world that can be hard and cold. The ale conner's work helps protect that comfort one sticky seat at a time. Outside, the night deepens. A soft rain begins to patter against the window shutters, and the conner wipes his hands on a cloth, satisfied with his verdict. The tavern's ale is declared good tonight. The crowd murmurs their approval, and you take another sip, knowing you're in safe hands or perhaps safe breeches. You're leaning back now, feeling the warmth of the ale spread through you, when the ale conner prepares for his most talked about task, the sticky breeches test. You'd heard whispers about it on your way here, half jokes from villagers about whose bench had been sacrificed last, or which alewife had nearly fainted in embarrassment when the conner stood up and his trousers didn't stick. And now, here you are watching this curious spectacle unfold before your own sleepy eyes. The conner moves with slow purpose, like a man resigned to his fate. He sets down his tankard, selects a well-worn bench, and pours a generous ladle of ale onto the seat. The room quiets except for the soft pop and hiss of the fire. Even the lute player pauses, sensing that this is the kind of entertainment that requires full attention. The conner gives the bench a moment, perhaps waiting for the liquid to settle, or maybe just delaying the inevitable. And then, in what can only be described as a moment of professional dignity, wrapped in absurdity, he lowers himself onto the sticky puddle. You try not to grin. You fail. It's hard not to. Imagine being the official who has to sit in ale for a living. Somewhere in history, someone decided this was the best way to guarantee a fair brew. Historians still argue whether this practice was genuinely effective or mostly symbolic, perhaps more about reassuring the public than testing the ale's quality. The Connor sits there stoic as if this is the most normal thing in the world. The seconds stretch out. You hear the rain outside, the soft creak of the tavern's beams, the gentle murmur of low conversations. A dog shifts in its sleep by the hearth. And then at last the Connor rises. For a heartbeat, everyone watches. Will his breeches cling to the bench? Will there be that telltale tug, that sticky protest as a leather lifts from wood? Tonight it seems the ale passes the test. There's the faintest sound of fabric parting from the bench, just enough to satisfy even the most skeptical onlooker. You can't help but wonder, was this really about sugar content, or just a way to give villagers something to talk about on long dark evenings? There's even an old story you overheard earlier at market of a Connor who claimed he could judge an ale's quality by the precise angle at which he leaned forward before standing. Whether that's true or not, no one knows, but it makes for a fine fireside tale. And while the sticky britches test might seem laughable now, it speaks to a deeper truth about medieval life. In a world without mass production, without standard labels or central regulators, communities had to rely on quirky homegrown methods to protect their daily staples. The sticky bench wasn't just a joke, it was a safeguard, a ritual, a tiny piece of shared assurance in an uncertain world. You take another sip, savoring the slight sweetness that lingers on your tongue. The ale Connor nods to the tavern keeper, wipes his hands, and heads back into the rain, his duty done for the night. The room exhales, the lute picks up his lazy tune, and you feel sleep tugging gently at your thoughts. Outside, the rain drums a soft, steady rhythm on the tavern roof, as if applauding this small victory for honest ale. The rain outside becomes a soft, steady percussion as you sit quietly watching the tavern's warm glow reflect off your half-full tankard. Your thoughts drift now to the curious web of rules that have shaped this humble cup of ale. Because as comforting as it feels in your hand, this drink is no simple affair, not in medieval England. It's protected, monitored, and at times legislated with a level of detail that would make even the most diligent modern bureaucrat raise an eyebrow. You glance around the room and imagine the invisible rules at play. This isn't just ale, it's ale that must meet the exacting standards of the local authorities. There's the assize of bread and ale for starters, a regulation dating back to the 13th century aimed at ensuring that neither bakers nor brewers try to cheat honest folk like you. The price of ale wasn't left to chance or market whim. It was tied to the cost of grain, and anyone caught overcharging or watering down the brew could find themselves fined or worse. And here's a thought to make you chuckle softly into your cup. Those rules weren't just for show. Villages took them seriously. So seriously, in fact, that whole communities would turn out to watch as a poor brewer was hauled before the local court for selling weak ale or charging too much. Imagine the medieval equivalent of a town hall meeting crossed with a reality show where the drama was all about foam levels and sugar content. Historians still argue whether these purity laws were mainly about protecting the public or whether they served as a handy way for lords and councils to collect fines and keep control over the local economy. There's probably truth in both ideas, as with so much in history. And here's a fringe tidbit that might surprise you. In some places, the rules extended to the precise size of drinking vessels. Yes, even the very cup you lift to your lips was sometimes subject to regulation. No sneaky undersized tankards allowed. Everyone deserved their fair pint, and woe betide the tavern keeper who tried to pass off a short measure. Your ale tonight thankfully seems to meet all these curious requirements. You taste the malty warmth, feel the weight of the cup in your hand, and listen to the soft hum of voices around you. It's oddly reassuring knowing that even in a world without refrigeration, without factories, without modern testing labs, people found their own ways to ensure quality. And those ways, however strange they seem to us now, kept communities fed, watered, and perhaps most importantly connected. A breeze slips through the tavern's warped doorframe, carrying the smell of wet earth and wood smoke. The fire crackles, the dog by the hearth sighs deeply in its sleep, and your eyelids grow just a little heavier. The ale conner may have moved on, but his work lingers in every sip. You take a quiet promise that your drink is as it should be. Your eyes drift lazily toward the hearth as the tavern settles into its familiar evening rhythm. The soft strum of the lute blends with the low murmur of voices, creating a soothing backdrop for your thoughts. And as you nurse what remains of your ale, your mind wanders to yet another curious detail of medieval drinking culture, the importance of foam. Yes, foam, or froth as it was often called, wasn't just a byproduct of pouring. It was a marker of quality, an odd but serious measure of a brewer's skill. Imagine, if you will, a weary ale conner or market inspector lifting a brimming tankard to eye level. He's not admiring its color, not checking for clarity this time. Instead, his gaze is fixed on the layer of froth that crowns the ale. The height, the texture, even how long it lingers before collapsing back into the liquid, all these elements could speak volumes about what lay beneath. A thick, creamy head might indicate a well-brewed, properly fermented ale, while a weak or quickly vanishing froth could raise suspicions of watered down or poorly made drink. You can almost picture it, a crowd gathered around watching with the kind of sleepy fascination reserved for slow but meaningful rituals. There's something oddly comforting about it, this shared trust in the tiny bubbles that cap your cup. And of course, disagreements arose. Historians still debate just how much importance medieval drinkers truly placed on froth. Was it a reliable indicator, or was it more about the satisfying look of a well-poured pint? Some suggest the foam was merely a visual cue in a world without clear glassware, while others argue it genuinely reflected the ale's richness. Then there's the fringe tidbit that tickles your imagination in certain markets. Foam height was so valued that disputes over it could end up in local courts. Imagine the scene: a brewer defending his froth before a stern-faced official, villagers leaning in to catch every word, perhaps a jester at the edge of the crowd quietly mocking the proceedings with exaggerated gestures. As you sip, your own ale leaves a modest ring of foam around the inside of your tankard. The firelight flickers against the wood grain, and the warmth of the drink seeps into your bones. The wind outside rattles the shutters, but within these walls, you're safe, cocooned in the simple, oddly precise world of medieval ale. You find yourself smiling just a little at the thought that something as fleeting as a layer of froth could inspire such careful attention, such heated debate, and such community investment. It's a reminder that even the smallest details can matter deeply when they're tied to daily life, to nourishment, to tradition, to that shared sense of what's right and good. And so you sit lulled by the gentle hum of the tavern, watching the foam settle as sleep begins to tug softly at the edges of your thoughts. Outside, the wind carries a scent of wet earth and old wood slipping through the tavern's cracks and mingling with the warmth of roasted meat and malt. Inside, the glow of the hearth bathes the room in flickering amber light. You shift slightly on the creaking bench, feeling the mellow heaviness of the ale, and your mind turns to another of those delightfully specific ale-tasting quirks: temperature. Now, to modern ears, ale temperature might sound like a matter of preference. Cold for some, room temp for others. But here in medieval England, temperature isn't about taste. It's about trust. Ale was expected to be served at the warmth it came out of fermentation, which, given the lack of refrigeration, meant something between lukewarm and gently cool depending on the season. Too warm, and folk might suspect the brewer rushed the process, skipping steps or cutting corners. Too cold, and well, it probably meant the barrel had been left out too long or tampered with. You take a slow sip from your wooden tankard, noting the faint warmth of the liquid. Not hot and not cold, just that curious middle ground that feels oddly soothing, as if it's meant to settle your stomach after a long day. The ale conner you saw earlier would have paid close attention to this feeling, the tankard sides noting the steam or lack of it rising from the drink. And the townsfolk, they'd watch too, eyes narrowed, alert for any sign that the brewer had failed their duty. Historians still argue whether temperature was truly a key part of these tastings, or simply a byproduct of the brewing process itself. Was it codified, written down somewhere in a dusty scroll, or was it just common knowledge passed through generations of drinkers and tasters? Either way, it mattered. Because consistency mattered. Because ale wasn't just a treat, it was your daily drink, your nourishment, your small comfort at the end of a wearying day. And here's a fringe tidbit to tuck away in your thoughts. In some villages, ale tasting ceremonies were timed for late afternoons, just as the air began to cool, and the taverns filled with folk returning from fields or workshops. The natural fall of the sun's warmth helped signal whether a tankard's temperature felt right. Imagine that a community so tuned to its rhythm that even the cooling of the day became part of its ale ritual. The lute player plucks a gentle, aimless melody from the corner. The fire settles into a low, steady crackle. The rain has eased, leaving behind only the soft drip of water from the eaves. You cradle your tankard, savoring the gentle warmth of the ale, and the slow pace of this world where even temperature tells a story. You lean forward slightly now, elbows resting on the scarred wooden table as your thoughts drift to another curious practice of the medieval ale world, the salt trick. Yes, salt. That simple, precious mineral, so valued that it was sometimes used as currency, played a quiet but clever role in ale tasting. Picture this: the ale conner, or perhaps a particularly fussy customer, pinches a bit of coarse salt between their fingers. With a slow, deliberate gesture, they sprinkle it into the tankard. The salt settles, dissolving slowly as the drinker watches intently. And what's the purpose of this? Well, in a time when ale could be thick or thin, hearty or watered down, the salt was said to help reveal its true nature. A good, well-malted ale would respond differently to the salt than a weak, dishonest brew. At least that was the belief. You watch as the imaginary grains swirl in your mind's eye, and you can't help but smile at the image of an entire tavern pausing to observe a pinch of salt's grand performance. Historians still argue whether this method had any real merit, or if it was more of a comforting ritual, a way to feel assured that what you were drinking had passed yet another test of quality. After all, science was still centuries away from offering clear answers, and salt, like foam or temperature, became another tool in the drinker's quiet arsenal. And here's a delightful fringe tidbit for you. In some villages, salt was so prized that an alehouse known for its fair use of the salt test might earn a loyal following. People would travel from nearby hamlets drawn by whispered promises of honest ale tested by the sacred pinch. Imagine that a marketing strategy centuries before slogans and signage. The salt trick was as much about trust as taste. In a world without labels or seals, without regulators or standard measures, small gestures like this offered a sense of security. They turned drinking ale into a shared act of faith, a quiet bond between brewer and drinker tested in the flickering light of the tavern's hearth. The lute's notes drift lazily across the room, mingling with the soft clink of tankards. Outside, the night deepens, wrapping the village in its quiet embrace. And within these walls, you sit warmed by ale salt and stories as sleep begins to beckon at the edges of your mind. Your gaze drifts now toward the tavern's broad beams and low ceiling, where the smoke from the hearth curls and gathers before slipping out through gaps in the thatch. The ale in your hand feels heavier somehow, as if carrying not just malt and water, but the weight of centuries of tradition. And among those traditions, there's one that weaves ale into the very fabric of medieval daily life, its role as part of your wages. That's right. As you sit here sipping thoughtfully, imagine for a moment that your payment for a week's honest work might not just be coins jingling in your pouch, but pints of ale set aside for you at the tavern or delivered straight to your table at home. In many trades, from farm laborers to craftsmen, part of a worker's compensation came in the form of ale, sometimes even detailed in contracts or spoken agreements. After all, what better way to ensure loyalty and contentment than to provide not just the means to buy drink, but the drink itself? You picture the dusty village square where men and women gather at week's end not just to collect their earning, but to receive their allotted measure of ale, a liquid wage as essential as bread. And it wasn't just any ale. The strength and quality might vary depending on the work, the season, or the generosity of the employer. A harvest laborer might be granted stronger stuff during the long, exhausting days of reaping, while a winter thatcher could expect a milder brew. Historians still debate how common this practice truly was across England. Were most workers satisfied with their liquid pay, or did it cause grumbling behind closed doors? Was ale a true bonus, or a convenient way for employers to economize, keeping wages low while offering a daily necessity? The records, like the ale itself, are sometimes a little cloudy. Here's a fringe tidbit that might bring a sleepy smile. In certain guilds, apprentices were rewarded with extra ale for particularly fine work or as part of their freedom celebration upon completing their training. A pint or two to mark their passage into the world of skilled labor, a modest but meaningful rite of passage. You take another slow sip, tasting not just the malty warmth, but the echoes of these old customs. The ale you enjoy tonight connects you in some small way to countless hands and hearts who saw in this simple drink a symbol of fairness, fellowship, and the honest price of a day's toil. The tavern hums softly around you. The fire glows low, casting dancing shadows across the floor. Outside, the village slumbers, and within these walls you rest, paid in comfort, in history, and in ale. The gentle clink of tankards and soft strum of the lute continue as you shift your gaze toward the hearth's glow, your thoughts turning now to the women behind many of these brews, the alewives. In the dim corners of your mind, you can almost see them, sleeves rolled up, faces flushed from the heat of the fire, stirring great steaming vats of malt and water. Their work is precise, rhythmic, and vital to village life, yet wrapped in a tangle of curious rules and expectations. Ale brewing, you see, wasn't just a profession for these women. It was often a household necessity, a way to supplement the family income and provide a reliable staple for the table. But with opportunity came oversight. The alewife's work was watched carefully by both neighbors and local authorities. Every batch of ale they produced could be inspected, tasted, and if found wanting, fined. Regulations governed not only the strength and price of their brew, but sometimes even the cleanliness of their equipment or the hours they could sell. And here's where things get oddly specific. In some villages, alewives were expected to hang a distinctive sign, a broom or ale stake, outside their door when they had fresh ale for sale. No flashy signs, no painted boards, just a humble branch or pole to announce their stock. It was simple, effective, and quietly charming. Imagine wandering down a muddy lane, eyes peeled for that telltale sign swaying in the breeze. Historians still argue whether these women were respected community figures or viewed with suspicion, their success sometimes drawing envy or accusations of cheating customers. Tales survive of alewives fined unfairly, or of rival brewers spreading rumors to harm a competitor's trade. The truth, as ever, is probably tangled somewhere between the two. And here's a fringe tidbit to tuck into your thoughts as you sip some local records. Show that particularly skilled alewives were granted small honors, perhaps a better market stall spot or exemption from certain taxes, because their brew was considered vital to the community's health and morale. Not bad for a batch of well-boiled barley and water. The room around you feels softer now, wrapped in shadow and firelight. You savor the last of your ale, imagining the quiet pride of those long-ago brewers, their lives woven into every cup you raise. The night deepens and sleep draws nearer as the alewives' legacy lingers in your thoughts like the faint sweetness left on your tongue. You shift slightly on the creaking bench, the weight of your tankard comforting in your hand, as your thoughts follow the ale out beyond the tavern's walls into the bustling, muddy heart of the village market. It's market day, and that means one thing: the spectacle of a public ale inspection. Imagine it now, stalls laden with turnips, onions, and rough cloth, the air filled with the smell of animals and wood smoke, and at the very center, the ale conner preparing to taste a local brew for all to see. There's a hush that falls over the crowd, as much out of curiosity as respect. People pause, baskets in hand, to watch the performance. The brewer stands by, wiping nervous palms on a homespun apron, hoping the conner finds the ale worthy. And you, mingling among the villagers, feel the quiet tension, because a failed tasting means not just shame, but a fine that might sting for months. The conner lifts the tankard, slowly inspecting its color in the weak sunlight, giving it a slow swirl, perhaps even watching the foam with that practiced eye. He sniffs, he sips, he waits. Historians still argue whether these inspections were truly about ensuring quality or whether they served more as public reminders of authority, proof that the town's rulers had their hands quite literally in the daily bread and drink of the people. And here's a fringe tidbit to amuse you. In some places, these tastings were such an event that musicians would gather to play softly in the background, lending a bit of drama to the proceedings. Picture it: a conner nose deep in ale while a fiddler saws out a slow, wheezy tune nearby. The medieval version of dinner and a show. The crowd watches, holds its breath, and when the verdict comes, a good ale, fair price, a gentle cheer ripples through the market square. The tension breaks and life resumes its steady pace. You take a sip of your own drink, warm with the thought that even in a world of hard work and harsh seasons, people found reason to gather, to share, and to celebrate the simple things. The sun dips lower. A breeze stirs the dust, and the market hums on as sleep's soft fingers brush against the edges of your mind. Your thoughts wander now, carried on the soft breeze drifting through the tavern's cracks, to the endless debates that seem to preoccupy not only medieval villagers, but even the scholars and scribes of the time, and amusingly still linger among modern historians. You sip your ale and ponder the age-old question that divided brewers, drinkers, and authorities alike. What exactly was the difference between ale and beer? In your day, the words might seem interchangeable, but in the medieval world, they weren't, not really. Ale was the older, familiar drink of England, brewed without hops. Beer, on the other hand, was the newcomer creeping in from the Low Countries, bringing with it that curious, bitter plant that would one day dominate the brewing world. And oh, how people grumbled. Some welcomed hops, claiming they kept the brew fresh longer. Others wrinkled their noses, declaring that the bitterness spoiled the natural sweetness of good, honest English ale. Picture the villagers at the tavern, their heads bent together in quiet debate. Voices low so as not to disturb the peace, but passionate all the same. One swears by the purity of ale, no hops to hide a brewer's faults. Another defends beer's keeping power, useful in the warmer months when spoilage threatened every barrel. Historians still argue whether the arrival of hopped beer truly marked a grand shift in English drinking habits, or whether at first it was just another novelty on the tavern shelf eyed with suspicion. And here's a delightful fringe detail for you. In some towns, special laws try to keep ale and beer separate, not just in brewing, but in where and how they could be sold. A tavern might be licensed for ale but not beer, or a brewer might need separate permissions to produce both. Imagine the paperwork all over two drinks that to the weary eye look nearly the same in the tankard. You sip again, the warmth of your ale settling in your chest, and smile at the thought that even in matters as simple as what filled one's cup, the medieval world found space for endless discussion. Outside, the stars prick the sky, and the tavern hums softly, wrapping you in its gentle, sleepy embrace. The tavern quiets even more now as the fire burns lower and shadows stretch across the room. Your thoughts, heavy-lidded and warm with ale, drift toward another peculiar obsession of medieval drinkers, the strength of the brew. You might think the matter simple, strong, or weak, light, or hearty, but here even this became the subject of rules, measurements, and no small amount of fuss. Picture the ale conner at work again, lifting a tankard, not just to test its flavor, but to gauge its potency. Too weak, and the brewer might face fines, scorn, or worse, a loss of reputation that could be ruinous in a close-knit village. Too strong, and suspicions might stir that the alewife or brewer was trying to shortchange customers by serving less per cup, hoping the higher strength would stretch supplies and profits. Historians still argue how precisely strength was tested in those days. Without the benefit of modern tools, how could an official truly measure alcohol content? Some suggest that experience, years of tasting, watching, and feeling guided the conner's judgment. Others believe that tools like specially marked cups or basic density tests played a part, though records are sparse and details hazy. And here's a fringe tidbit to lull you deeper into the past. In some villages, ale strength was tied to season or festival. A stronger brew might be expected at harvest time, when workers needed hearty refreshment, or at Yuletide when celebrations called for something bolder to warm cold bones. And woe to the brewer who failed to provide it because tradition as much as law held sway over the cup. You sip your own ale thoughtfully, savoring its gentle kick, imagining the delicate balance each brewer had to strike between flavor and potency, honesty and profit, tradition and innovation. The tavern glows softly around you, the world outside cloaked in night, and sleep's gentle pull grows stronger with every passing moment. The soft creak of the tavern's timbers and the faint hiss of the hearth accompany your thoughts now as they meander toward the bright moments when ale took center stage, not just in quiet taverns or at the end of a long day's work, but at the heart of village festivals. You can almost hear it, the bustle of market day fairs, the laughter of children chasing each other through muddy lanes, the clatter of hooves and wheels, and beneath it all the steady flow of ale. These festivals, whether marking the harvest, the arrival of a saint's day, or some local tradition whose origins were long forgotten, offered perfect excuses for ceremonial tastings. The ale conner, who on most days worked in quiet corners, now became part of the show. With villagers gathered around, he'd lift the tankard high, take his measured sip, and pronounce the brew fit or not for the feast ahead. Historians still argue whether these festival tastings had true legal weight, or whether they served mainly as a comforting ritual, a way to remind all present that the community watched over itself. Perhaps it was both a blend of regulation and celebration, law and merriment, as so many medieval customs were. And here's a fringe tidbit that may bring a drowsy smile. Some village records hint that certain ale conners were known for their showmanship, drawing out their verdicts, pausing dramatically before announcing the ale's quality, or even crafting little rhymes to share their judgment. Imagine that: a sleepy village square, the smell of roasting meat on the air, and a conner delivering his ale review in verse to the applause and laughter of his neighbors. You take another slow sip, letting the imagined scene unfold: brightly dressed villagers' banners flapping in the breeze, tankards raised in cheer, and the ale flowing freely as the sun dips low over the thatched rooftops. The festival fades gently into the night, leaving only contented hearts and sleepy heads nodding by the firelight, yours among them, as the gentle pull of rest grows ever stronger. Your eyelids grow heavier as you let your thoughts drift to the quieter, less festive side of ale law, the part no brewer or alewife wish to face the fines. Because while a good tankard of ale could bring praise, custom, and a bit of fame, a bad one might cost you dearly. Picture now the local court, perhaps held in the dusty upper room of the tavern itself, or under a great tree in the village square. A brewer stands nervously before the reeve or bailiff, waiting as the charge is read aloud. The ale was too weak, too dear, too poorly made. The fine could vary depending on the offense and the mood of the officials. A few pennies for a first misstep, harsher penalties for repeat offenders, and the shame that might weigh heavier than the coin. In a village where everyone knew everyone, word of bad ale spread faster than the evening breeze. You'd hear the murmurs at market, see the pointed looks as you passed. Historians still argue whether these punishments were truly about protecting the public or padding the pockets of local lords and councils. Were they fair, or were they just another way to keep the common folk in line? Perhaps, like so many things, the truth lay somewhere between. And here's a sleepy fringe detail to bring a smile. In some cases, the fine for bad ale wasn't paid in coin at all, but in ale itself. So many gallons given to the court or the local officials. Imagine handing over your brew to the very people who judged it wanting. A bit awkward, don't you think? You take another sip, savoring the thought that for tonight at least your ale passes every test. The tavern's glow feels softer, the fire's crackle lower as sleep creeps closer, wrapping you in its gentle familiar comfort. The tavern's warmth wraps around you like a well-worn cloak as your mind drifts to the simple, satisfying pairing that so often accompanied a tankard of ale in medieval England: bread. Yes, bread and ale, companions at the table, as natural together as the fire in the hearth. You can almost feel the coarse loaf in your hand, its crust dark from the baker's oven, its crumb dense and hearty, perfect for soaking up the last sweet drops at the bottom of your cup. In many homes, this was the staple meal: a thick wedge of bread, a generous serving of ale, and perhaps, if fortune smiled that day, a bit of cheese or salted meat. No need for delicate seasoning or elaborate dishes. The bread gave body, the ale gave warmth, and together they filled stomachs and hearts alike. And in the tavern that pairing was just as cherished. You picture the landlord slicing hunks from a great round loaf, passing them out to customers. With their drink, no plate needed, just rough hands and ready appetite. Historians still argue whether the bread and ale combination was driven by necessity or by choice. Did folk prefer it, or was it simply what was available, what could be counted on day after day? Either way, it fed generations a humble partnership that sustained both rich and poor. And here's a fringe tidbit to tuck into your thoughts. As sleep calls you nearer in some regions, special ale bread was baked loaves made from the spent grains of brewing dark and dense, a frugal baker's way to waste nothing. Imagine the flavor earthy malty with a hint of the brew that gave it life. You take another slow sip, savoring the imagined taste as the fire's glow softens and the world outside fades into the deep quiet of the night. The simple pleasures of bread and ale linger on your tongue, and sleep settles softly on your shoulders. Your head tilts gently against the tavern's sturdy beam as your thoughts wander further now to the curious and surprisingly close connection between ale and the medieval church. It's easy to forget as you sip your drink that this humble brew played a role not just in daily life but in spiritual duties as well. Picture, if you will, the parish priest or local monks collecting tithes not just in coin or grain, but sometimes in ale, that familiar necessary offering. In some villages, the church owned brewing rights, or at least kept a watchful eye over the alehouses, ensuring both quality and fair pricing. The money collected through ale taxes and tithes often funded church repairs, candles for the altar, or alms for the poor. Your cup in a quiet way helps support the chapel's crumbling roof or the parish's simple charity. And during festivals, saints' days, or church-sponsored fairs, ale flowed freely under the church's blessing, the lines between sacred and secular blurred by the shared joy of community gatherings. Historians still argue whether this link between ale and church was born of necessity, a practical way to fund religious life, or whether it reflected a deeper understanding of ale's place at the center of village unity. Here's a fringe tidbit to lull you deeper in certain parishes' records survive of priests themselves being fined for brewing poor ale or overcharging their flock. Imagine that a man of God standing before the local court, hat in hand, apologizing for a batch gone wrong. The fire crackles softly, casting long shadows that dance across the tavern walls. You sip your ale, feeling the weight of centuries in its warmth. The world outside is hushed now, wrapped in darkness as the soft pull of sleep draws closer still. Your gaze drifts toward the tavern's door, where the last glow of the firelight flickers against the night. Your thoughts turn now to a simple yet curious marker of the medieval ale world, the ale pole or ale stake. Picture it swaying gently in the evening breeze, a long branch or wooden pole with a wisp of greenery or cloth tied near its end, jutting out above a cottage or alehouse door. No need for painted signs or grand announcements, just this modest symbol known to all declaring that fresh ale waits within. You can almost see it now as you wander the muddy village lanes, in your mind's eye, eyes lifted to spot the telltale stake. A cluster of poles might line the main street on market day, a quiet competition for passing trade. And when the ale ran dry, down came the stake, and with it the promise of refreshment until the next batch was ready. Historians still argue whether the ale stake's origin lay in pagan tradition, a remnant of older symbols of hospitality, or whether it was simply a practical marker born of necessity in a mostly illiterate age. Either way, its meaning was clear, and its presence familiar, a beacon of comfort in the everyday life of villagers. Here's a fringe tidbit to bring a sleepy smile. In some towns, disputes arose over whose ale stake could protrude furthest into the lane, as brewers vied for the attention of thirsty travelers. The medieval version of a flashing neon sign, though far gentler on the eyes. You take a slow sip, imagining the quiet satisfaction of spotting that humble pole at day's end, the promise of rest and warmth just beyond the door. The night deepens, the wind hums softly at the shutters, and sleep draws ever nearer, as steady and certain as the ale stakes sway in the breeze. The tavern's walls seem to breathe with the night as you sit back heavy-lidded and content, your mind wandering now toward the gentle charm of alehouses set by rivers. Picture it, a squat building of stone or timber perched at the water's edge, its reflection rippling softly in the current. You hear the quiet lap of water against the worn dock, the soft murmur of voices rising and falling like the tide, and the clink of tankards carried on the breeze. These riverside alehouses offered more than just drink. They provided rest for weary travelers, a spot for boatmen to moor their craft, and a place where fishers might trade their catch for a warm meal and a cool cup. The river itself seemed to lend a kind of sleepy magic to these places, a rhythm of coming and going that soothed the soul as surely as the ale soothed the body. Historians still argue whether such taverns sprang up out of practical need, or whether they became gathering spots through habit, drawn by the lure of water and the trade it brought. Perhaps both. A river crossing was a natural pause in a journey, and what better way to mark that pause than with ale and company? And here's a fringe tidbit to stir your drowsy imagination. In certain villages, riverside taverns hosted informal ale fairs on market days, where folk would gather to drink, trade, and swap stories, the hum of voices mingling with the splash of oars and the creak of rope. You sip again, tasting the imagined coolness of river air, hearing the water's song beneath the lull of the tavern's hearth. The world outside is quiet now, the river flowing steady and sure like the pull of sleep, drawing you deeper into its gentle current. The fire's glow flickers low, casting soft patterns on the tavern's rough floorboards, as your thoughts drift toward a time when ale itself began to change, when whispers of imported hops stirred both curiosity and suspicion in the village air. You can almost hear the quiet grumbling at the corners of the room, the older drinkers shaking their heads as they speak of this foreign addition, this bitter herb from across the sea that threatened to alter their beloved brew. Imagine the scene: a merchant's cart arriving from distant ports, barrels of hopped beer clinking softly as they're rolled into the market. The local alewives watch warily, their eyes narrowing as they hear the promises beer that keeps longer travels farther resists spoilage. The younger folk might be intrigued, daring to sample this new taste, but many cling to the sweetness of traditional ale, suspicious of anything that dulls its natural charm. Historians still argue whether the arrival of hops truly marked the decline of English ale, or simply added new variety to the drinking world. Some records suggest a slow, grudging acceptance. Others hint at bitter divides between those who embraced the change and those who saw it as an insult to generations of careful brewing. And here's a fringe tidbit to bring a smile as sleep draws closer. In certain towns, laws were passed limiting or taxing hopped beer, meant to protect local ale from being overshadowed. Imagine the tavern keeper weighing his options, barrel by barrel, as he tries to please both tradition and trade. You take a slow sip, tasting in your mind the imagined bitterness of hops mingling with sweet malt, and feel the warmth of the ale settle deeper, anchoring you in this gentle, changing world. Outside, the night holds its breath, and sleep beckons soft as a whispered tale over a well-worn cup. The room feels warmer now, as if the low crackle of the fire has wrapped you in its glow, and your thoughts wander to the curious place ale held in medieval medicine. Yes, ale, your simple, comforting drink, was thought to do more than quench thirst or lift spirits. It had its place in remedies and tonics, in the quiet hope that what soothed the heart might also mend the body. Picture a village healer or kindly grandmother mixing a draught ale warmed gently by the hearth, perhaps infused with herbs like sage, rosemary, or even a touch of honey. A cup for the fevered, a sip for the weak, a tankard for those recovering from the chills. Ale was seen as gentle nourishing, and when paired with the right additions, a way to bring strength back to tired limbs. Historians still argue whether these uses of ale had true medicinal value, or whether they offered comfort through ritual and familiarity. After all, in a world without modern medicine, what better than a warm, familiar cup to ease the mind even if the body remained ill? And here's a sleepy fringe tidbit. Certain records tell of ale brewed with odd ingredients, crawfish, for example, or even powdered pearl, believed to bring healing in desperate times. Imagine the taste, and perhaps you'll smile softly at the thought of those ancient experiments in liquid cure. You sip again the ale's imagined warmth mingling with the hush of the night. The tavern seems quieter now, the world outside wrapped in darkness and sleep's gentle pull stronger than ever. Ale for comfort, ale for health, ale for peace. Its story is your story, shared across the ages in every cup. The tavern shadows stretch longer, the fires glow lower, as your thoughts drift now to another thread, woven deep into the story of ale taxes. Yes, taxes, even in your humble tankard, the hand of the king or local lord was never far. Picture it: every pint you sip, every barrel rolled into a tavern cellar, watched over by officials keen to collect their share for the crown's coffers. In medieval England, ale was taxed in countless ways. Sometimes the tax was set by volume, sometimes by strength, sometimes by the simple act of brewing itself. The money raised went to fund castles, roads, wars, and sometimes, at least in theory, the common good. But to you, the drinker, it was just one more cost folded quietly into the price of your cup. Historians still argue whether these taxes were fair or burdensome, whether they helped support communities or simply filled the pockets of the powerful. One thing is certain: ale's central place in daily life made it the perfect target for eager collectors of royal dues. And here's a fringe tidbit to stir a drowsy grin. In some towns, tax collectors were mocked in local songs and stories, portrayed as figures more interested in sampling the brew than counting the barrels. Imagine a portly official inspecting a tavern stock, one sip at a time, leaving with cheeks rosy and ledgers light. You sip your own ale warm with the thought that while kings and lords took their share, the brew itself remained a comfort no tax could spoil. The tavern hums softly, the night deepens, and sleep's pull grows ever gentler, as steady and certain as the king's dew on every barrel. The room is nearly silent now, the fire a faint glow, as your mind wanders to one of the more curious corners of medieval ale culture: the tools of the tasters, the odd bits of gear and makeshift instruments that accompanied those charged with judging your drink. Imagine the ale connor's small pouch or satchel, worn soft from years of service, holding items as humble as his duties were important. There might be a wooden spoon carved smooth from use for skimming foam or stirring a fresh pour, a length of coarse cloth used to wipe tankards or dab at spills. Perhaps a small cup or ladle marked with lines to ensure a fair measure. And of course, his trusty leather breeches, essential for the sticky bench test, as you well remember. Historians still argue whether these tools were standardized or left to the taste and tradition of each town's appointed taster. Some records suggest official kits were issued. Others hint that each conner made do with what he had, passing down his methods like a family recipe. And here's a fringe tidbit to ease your thoughts towards sleep. In certain places, a taster might carry a small strip of parchment or wood notched to show the legal price or strength of ale, using it as a quiet reference as he went about his rounds. A medieval cheat sheet, if you will. You take another slow sip, picturing these simple tools clutched in work-worn hands, their purpose plain but important: The tavern fades around you, the night presses close, and sleep draws nearer, soft as the worn cloth in the ale conner's kit. The tavern seems to breathe with the night now, the fire a low glow, the room hushed except for the faint crackle of embers. Your thoughts drift further, drawn to the stories spun over countless tankards' tales, where ale flowed as freely as the words of villagers, warmed by its comfort. Folklore and ale are old friends, their histories intertwined in every sleepy corner of England. Picture the scene, a dimly lit room. Like this, the air thick with wood smoke and malt, as an old shepherd leans forward, his voice low, sharing the tale of a phantom brewer whose ale never soured, no matter how long it kept. Or a fisherman, eyes twinkling, telling of the tavern where the devil himself once tried to pay with coin that turned to ash. Historians still argue whether such tales were born from truth stretched by time or pure invention shaped by the flicker of the fire and the taste of the ale. Likely, as with all good stories, they carried a little of both. And here's a fringe tidbit to tickle your drowsy mind. In certain villages, it was said that to spill your ale was to invite bad luck, unless you whispered a blessing. As the drops hit the floor, just one more small charm, in a world where every sip seemed to hold a bit of magic. You sip again, the ale's imagined sweetness, mingling with the soft music of memory and myth. The night wraps you in its quiet, the story settling over you like a well-worn cloak as sleep draws ever closer. The tavern's gentle hush feels almost like a lullaby, now the flickering glow of the hearth casting long shadows that sway and stretch as if the room itself nods off with you. Your thoughts wander to those moments when ale wasn't just a drink, but the heart of a gathering, the village ale feasts. You can almost hear it, the soft hum of voices rising and falling in friendly chatter, the scrape of benches, the clink of tankards raised in quiet cheer. Picture it, long trestle tables set out beneath the eaves of the alehouse or in the open air on a mild evening. Platters of bread and cheese passed along by rough hands, children weaving between the grown-ups, dogs dozing beneath the tables, hopeful for a drop scrap. At the center of it all, the ale flows not in wild abandon, but in steady, friendly measure enough to warm the belly and soften the cares of the day. These gatherings weren't grand banquets for lords or kings. They were humble communal affairs where neighbors shared news, laughter, and the comfort of company. Historians still argue whether these feasts were formal events or simply what happened when the ale was good, the work was done, and the night invited fellowship. Perhaps it didn't matter. What mattered was the feeling that quiet bond forged over a shared cup. And here's a French tidbit for your drowsy thoughts. Some village feasts were marked by the singing of old ale songs, slow lilting tunes passed down from elder to child, meant as much to soothe as to celebrate. Imagine those voices low and gentle blending with the night breeze. You sip, savoring the imagined taste of that shared warmth as sleep tugs gently at your thoughts, drawing you deeper into its quiet embrace. The tavern feels still now, as if holding its breath with you, the last embers in the hearth casting a soft red glow that barely touches the walls. Your thoughts, heavy and slow, wander at last to the quiet end of ale's long winding chapter in village life, the slow fade of the old brew as stricter rules and changing tastes nudged it aside. Picture it, the familiar ale stakes taken down one by one as beer, stronger, longer lasting, and increasingly demanded, took its place on tavern shelves. The arrival of hops once eyed with suspicion became the norm. The once bustling ale feast gave way to quieter, more measured gatherings, and the ale conner with his sticky bench and salt pinches found his duties fewer, his role slipping into memory. Historians still argue whether this shift marked progress or loss. Did beer bring needed improvements in safety and shelf life, or did it rob village life of a tradition that had bound it together for generations? The debate lingers like the last sweetness of ale on your tongue. And here's a French tidbit to tuck into your final waking thoughts. In a few stubborn corners of England, small brews of traditional ale, hop-free and sweet, survived quietly for centuries, kept alive by hands that remember, by taste buds that refuse to forget. You sip once more, though your tankard is nearly empty, and feel the weight of history in that imagined drop, the echo of countless cups raised in friendship, comfort, and simple joy. The night outside is deep and silent. The tavern at peace and sleep gathers you in its soft, sure arms, as gently as the passing of the old ale into memory. And now, as your breathing slows and your thoughts grow soft, let the last flicker of the firelight fade gently in your mind. Picture the quiet tavern, the benches empty, the tankards washed and set aside, the air still faintly scented with wood smoke and malt. The night has wrapped the village in a hush, and the world beyond those old wooden walls has grown still, save for the soft sigh of the breeze and the quiet lapping of water against stone. You feel the weight of the centuries drift away, as if the stories of ale and its curious rules have settled like a comforting quilt around your shoulders. The voices of villagers, the slow tread of the ale conner, the gentle hum of the feast, they are all distant now, part of a past that asks nothing more of you than to rest. Let your muscles soften, your breath deepen, and your mind wander where it will, knowing that here in this quiet space you are safe, you are warm, and you are at peace. The tale of ale has ended for tonight, but its gentle rhythms linger steady as your heart beats soft as the night's embrace. Sleep well, dear listener, and may your dreams be as kind and calming as the slow drift of an old village song carried on the breeze of a world long past.